The world outside was a watercolor wash of grey. Rain lashed against the windows, a relentless rhythm against the silence of the house. Eliza sat curled in her armchair, a worn copy of Wuthering Heights resting on her lap, the words blurring into meaningless ink. A sudden knock, sharp and insistent, cut through the quiet. Her heart stuttered, a bird trapped in her chest. She knew that knock, knew the man attached to it. Tony, he shouldn't be here, he be here, not after all this time, not after she had shut everyone out, built walls of silence and solitude around herself. Yet there he was, a shadow looming behind the frosted glass of her front door. His presence was a crack in the fragile peace she had constructed, a threat to the carefully curated stillness of her world. Eliza gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles white against the worn fabric. Her gaze flicked to the photo on the mantelpiece, a splash of colour in the muted tones of the room. Todd, her Todd, his face split into a wide grin, his eyes crinkled in the corners with laughter. A pang of longing, sharp and piercing, tore through her. She had to make a choice, face Tony and whatever news he carried that sat heavy in his eyes. Or Eliza closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. The world held its breath with her. Eliza hadn't always been afraid of a knock at the door. There was a time when she lived for the adrenaline rush, the sharp edge of danger that came with wearing the badge. She'd joined the force young, a bright-eyed rookie eager to prove herself. Her partner, a seasoned officer with a gruff exterior and a heart of gold, had taken her under his wing. Tony. He'd taught her the ropes, shown her the dark underbelly of their city that hid beneath the glittering facade. It was during a routine patrol, sirens wailing, lights painting the night in strobing hues of red and blue, that she discovered her gift, her curse. A runaway truck careened towards a group of schoolchildren. The driver slumped over the wheel, unconscious. Time seemed to slow, to stretch, the world around her a blurred tableau. An unknown force surged within her, answering a desperate plea. Everything stopped. The world became a photograph, each grain of light, each mote of dust suspended in the stillness. She saved the children, pulled the driver to safety, and then, exhausted, terrified, she let time resume its relentless march. Tony, ever observant, had seen the flicker in her eyes, the blue spark that danced on her fingertips. He kept her secret. He became her confidant, her rock. They stopped countless crimes, their teamwork made seamless by her ability. Eliza was a hero, her name whispered in awe by the citizens she protected. But every hero has their downfall. The memory was a jagged shard of glass, sharp and painful. A hostage situation, a bank robbery gone wrong, the air thick with tension, the metallic tang of fear clinging to the back of her throat. She remembered the glint of sunlight reflecting off the barrel of the gun, the gunman's eyes wild with desperation, and then the blue spark. Time stuttered, froze. But this time, something was different. The air crackled with an unfamiliar energy, a resistance she'd never encountered before. It felt like trying to swim through thick molasses, her movements sluggish, her control faltering. The strain was immense, a searing pain lancing through her head, a high-pitched whine ringing in her ears. She pushed, desperately trying to hold on to the fragile stillness, but it was no use. Time snapped back with a vengeance. The gunshot echoed in the sudden silence, a deafening roar. Eliza crumpled to the ground, her side blooming with a searing, agonizing pain. Tony's horrified face swam into view, his voice a frantic whisper against the ringing in her ears. She survived, but her world had irrevocably shifted on its axis. The doctors marveled at her recovery, but the truth was a hidden scar, a constant throb of pain that served as a stark reminder of that day. Her gift, now a liability, was gone. She was deemed unfit for duty, discharged with honors and a heart full of ashes. The silence of the house pressed in on Eliza, suffocating her. Tony's knock echoed in the stillness, a constant reminder of the choice she had to make. She'd retreated from the world after the incident, withdrawing into a shell of her former self. The guilt was a heavy weight, dragging her down, whispering insidious doubts in her ear. If she had been faster, stronger, if she hadn't faltered, Todd, her anchor in the storm, had been her pillar of strength. He never blamed her, his love a steady beacon in the darkness. He understood her need to withdraw, her fear of the world that had once felt so familiar, so safe. He'd left the force soon after, unable to bear the constant reminder of what she had lost, what had lost. He poured his energy into creating a haven for her, a sanctuary where time seemed to stand still. But Eliza knew the truth. She wasn't protecting herself, she was hiding. Hiding from the pain, the guilt, the fear. Hiding from the world that moved on without her. She'd watched Todd, his gaze growing distant, a flicker of restlessness in his eyes, a longing she couldn't quite place. Then one day he'd announced he was joining the police academy, his jaw set with a familiar determination, his eyes alight with a spark that mirrored her own. He was doing it for her, living the life she could no longer have. Eliza drew another shaky breath, the silence of the house pressing in on her, heavy and suffocating. Each tick of the clock on the mantelpiece was a hammer blow to her heart. This was her doing, her choice. The blue spark, once a symbol of hope, had become a prison of her own making. When Tony had arrived, his face etched with a grief she couldn't bear to decipher, she had panicked. The world had tilted on its axis, the familiar fear twisting in her gut, cold and sharp. She couldn't lose Todd, not him too, not when she had already lost so much. So she did the only thing she could think of. She stopped time. The world froze. The rain hung suspended in mid-air, each droplet a tiny crystal. Tony stood on her doorstep, his hand raised in a mid-knock, his face a mask of concern. Forever caught between a breath and a word. It had been a week, or maybe it had been a lifetime. Time had lost all meaning within the bubble of her making. The stillness was all-consuming, a suffocating blanket that threatened to smother her. Eliza moved through the frozen world like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. She tended to the garden, the flowers forever caught in their prime, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the stillness around them. She read every book in the house, the words offering a temporary escape from the prison of her own making, but the silence was always there, a constant companion, the silence of the birdsong, the rustle of leaves, the laughter of children playing in the street, the silence of Todd's voice, his reassuring presence absent from the house they had built together. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his hand in hers, the memory so vivid it brought tears to her eyes. She haunted his side of the bed, tracing his outline on the pillow, seeking solace in the faint scent of his cologne that lingered on the sheets. At night, when the shadows grew long and the silence became deafening, she would replay their memories in her mind, clinging to them like a lifeline. Their first date, awkward and sweet. The day he proposed, down on one knee in the pouring rain, his face beaming with love. Their wedding day, surrounded by family and friends, their laughter echoing in the warm summer air. Each memory, once a source of joy, now felt like a fresh wound, a reminder of all she had lost, all she could lose. Eliza stood before the bathroom mirror staring at her reflection. Her face was pale, her skin almost translucent in the unchanging light. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, were now dull with exhaustion, the weight of her decision etched in the lines around them. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. She traced the outline of her lips, remembering the feel of Todd's kisses, the way he used to cup her face in his hands. his touch sending shivers down her spine. She closed her eyes, willing herself to remember the sound of his voice, the rumble of his laughter. "Promise me something," he whispered, his voice raspy with fatigue. His hand clutching hers as he lay in the hospital bed after the incident, she'd nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Promise me you won't disappear, not even if it feels like the world is ending. Promise me you'll keep fighting for us." Eliza opened her eyes, her reflection staring back at her, a stranger in a familiar guise. She was drowning in the stillness, the silence closing in like a tomb. But she had made a promise. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The world outside her window remained frozen, a perpetual tableau of that rainy afternoon. The strain of maintaining the time lock was taking its toll. A constant ache throbbed behind her eyes, a low hum of exhaustion that permeated her very being. She grew weaker, her movements sluggish, her energy depleted. Food rotted untouched on the kitchen counter. The once vibrant houseplants withered, their leaves turning to dust. Her reflection in the mirror became increasingly gaunt, her skin pallid, her eyes hollow. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage of her own making, the world outside her reach, the man she loved trapped in amber. Yet she clung to the stillness, terrified of what awaited her on the other side. The fear of Tony's news, the potential pain it carried, was a monstrous thing, threatening to consume her. She knew deep down that her time was running out. She couldn't maintain this forever. The world was straining against its bonds, the fabric of reality thinning. The choice was a double-edged sword: release the time lock and face the unknown, the potential devastation of Tony's news, or remain frozen, clinging to this fragile illusion of control, knowing that she was condemning herself to a slow, agonizing death. Eliza stood before the front door, her hand hovering inches from the doorknob. The air crackled with pent-up energy, the world holding its breath. She could feel it, the pull of time, the insistent tug to resume its course. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle aching, her vision blurring at the edges. She was nearing her limit. Tears streamed down her face, hot against her cold skin. Was this truly the life she wanted? A half-life, suspended in time, forever teetering on the precipice of grief? She had condemned herself to solitude, to a slow, agonizing demise, all in the name of love, of fear. But what was love without trust, without faith? What kind of life could they build on a foundation of fear and avoidance? Todd wouldn't want this for her. He wouldn't want her to sacrifice herself, to wither away in this self-imposed prison. He would want her to be brave, to face the future, whatever it may hold, with courage and grace. Eliza closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the doorknob. But she didn't turn it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The fear was still there, a cold fist clenching around her heart. But it was overshadowed by a different kind of fear, the fear of losing herself, of betraying the love they shared, of letting her fear dictate the rest of her life. And so she stood there, frozen in time, caught between the agony of the past and the uncertainty of the future, her heart a battlefield of love and loss. The world held its breath, waiting for her decision, and in the silence she made her choice.